Okay, we are live finally. I managed to get my stuff together, and thanks to Instinctive for waiting for a couple of minutes, and to anyone who's joined live. If not, I hope you find some useful insights once you listen back to the stream. For anyone who's on shadowball.com Patreon, you already know that this stream has been in the works for quite some time. I believe we've already posted this on Blue Sky and X as well. So, hello everyone, and welcome to episode one of UCL Matchday podcast, where we try to deep dive into some aspects of UCL Fantasy and how to really approach UCL Fantasy using expected value. It's a fairly new game compared to something like Fantasy Premier League, and there's some uncharted territory which hopefully we'll try to explore and make the game a little bit easier for you to play. So let me start off by welcoming my first guest in episode one, FPL Instinctive. You all know him as the probably the best Brighton predictor there is, and I'll let him introduce himself because I told him before we started the stream that even though I do follow his content and I do read up on his expected lineups, that's pretty much where it ends just because I purely approach it from an FPL perspective. So, first of all, welcome Instinctive. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good, and I hope you're all good as well. So I'm Adi, or Instinctive, and I write about Brighton and Hove Albion and try to predict their lineups, even though all of their managers try and sabotage me. And this is my third season of UCL Fantasy,
Okay, that's
the first
actually.
season being better than the second.
So sorry, I interrupted, but I just wanted to ask. So, how's the experience been? I'm assuming 2 seasons ago, obviously, there was probably no expected value. So, how's the experience been playing without EV, with EV?
I still looked at a lot of data online, so most of my time was spent on FBref and just mentally trying to calculate EV.
Yeah.
Uh, but I basically just prioritized minutes and people with
Hmm.
good expected data. If they didn't have minutes, I just wouldn't go there because like mental error bars. And I got very lucky that season, which was nice.
Where did you finish that season?
EVs definitely made it a better process. 195?
Okay, that's outstanding. So, if you don't mind me asking, what do you remember what the breakup was, as in where you were at the end of group stages? Because I believe there are two separate prizes, right? When you win the group stages, I think you get tickets to that season's Champions League final, and if you win it at the end, you get tickets to next season's Champions League final.
I don't remember exactly, but it was somewhere in the thousands. I don't think I had a single red arrow in the knockout stages.
Wow,
So it picked up a lot.
that's pretty impressive.
Or maybe like one, but not. It, yeah,
And once you get to the knockout stages,
but that was a very lucky season.
yeah, yeah. Once you get to the knockout stages, it does get a little difficult, right? Because you do need to hedge on certain teams because unfortunately you don't have too many chips. Especially in the past where there were fewer MDs, all of our focus was to spend both wildcard and limitless in the group stages and then try to manage all the remaining stages with free transfers. So I remember last season I kept betting against PSG and they qualified for a couple of rounds,
Yeah.
and then I bet against Dortmund with PSG, and then PSG got knocked out despite Mbappe getting a ton of
Yeah.
chances. So I'm assuming that that also plays a huge part, right?
Yeah, I was in the same boat as you last year. I
Hmm.
consistently bet against Dortmund, which was
Hmm.
not ideal. I think my process would change a lot more now compared to 2 seasons ago
Hmm.
because I think I would approach risk more freely now. So I would very gladly completely hedge against a team.
Yep.
I think I was hedging my bets a few seasons ago and not fully committing, but definitely leaning toward the favorite in each matchup. Naturally, because the better assets were also from the favorite, and the extra budget made it quite easy to get everyone you wanted.
Yeah, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. So we're just going to move into what the agenda that I had published today for this episode, and we can start off by looking at your Limitless Six. So walk us through what was your thought process, because I remember you and I had a chat about this, and for example, I was very insistent on Wildcard Six to begin with, And then as I got closer to MD6 deadline, I started thinking um, it actually makes sense to reverse the order because Limitless 8, first of all, I was always uneasy just because I could not utilize the bench, and Limitless without utilizing the bench, it just feels like why do we even need that much of money? So I was hesitant as it is, but getting all the lineups is extremely powerful as a chip. I don't think there's any other fantasy game where we have the luxury of getting all the lineups to all the games in a match day. Not even fan team because they only allow you to get lineups for the first game of the game week in Premier League. So walk us through what was your thought process behind this change.
So my original plan when I started during match day one was just not to have a chip strategy and just
Hmm.
to go
Yep.
long because like the format of the Champions League changed, so I thought there was plenty of uncertainty. And then I landed upon Limitless 7 Wildcard 8 or Wildcard 7 Limitless 8, and
Hmm.
that was my plan until match day 4, at which point I saw that the swing between match days 6, 7, and 8 was quite big, and I would lose a lot of EV, and I didn't think it would be worth the amount I would gain in match day 8. So then it came down to Wildcard 6 Limitless 8 or Limitless 6 Wildcard 7,
Hmm.
and I just didn't like the fact that there would be a month
Hmm.
between match day 6 and 7, and too much could change on a wild card. I was not comfortable with picking any assets. Like, you might pick someone from Sporting, for example, and they may transfer out,
Hmm.
at which point you only have two free transfers because you can't roll a transfer, and your team is in a mess. I just didn't think it's worth the risk. Plus, the fixtures were there to target on a limitless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Didn't work out, but
I think
they were there.
yeah, one thing that definitely I was not the biggest fan of was not getting a single tilted fixture, the lineups for even the single tilted fixture because Atletico's game was the next day, and ideally we should have at least one game where, for example, Milan's game, uh, two in game D4, I believe, where a lot of people played limitless chip. They got access to Milan's lineups, which is why they could load up on Pulisic and I don't know,
Yeah,
Morata or Tammy Abraham, whomever it was, and Theo Hernandez, who's been a perennial disappointment on a side note in UCL Fantasy,
yeah.
even though he's tearing it up in Serie A Fantasy. So I guess that was my only concern. But like you said, the month-long break is just it's weird and it's eerie because, like you said, transfers, also injuries, and yeah, going out of favor, managers changing strategies or tactics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it didn't sit well with me like you, and I'm glad
And
we pivoted. I'm not sure you are glad because I don't want to speak for you, but I think you must not be too happy with the limitless, right?
this is the second season in a row in which my rank is doubled after using Limitless.
Ooh.
So I'm not the biggest fan of the chip, but yeah, I think some decisions were very questionable and just rushed. If I thought them through a bit more, they would have probably been better, but that could also be hindsight driven. Like, I was happy with a lot of this team
Hmm.
pre-deadline, and some things were slightly unlucky, I would say. Like Jonathan David could have had a few more goals, but he's also Jonathan David, so he misses a lot of goals.
Yep.
Bayern's clean sheet, for example.
Also, I think I know that Gyökeres has fallen off. His numbers have fallen off a cliff ever since Amorim left. But my thought process was the EV hasn't changed that much. It has definitely because Club Brugge is an opponent where you should expect to see tremendous EV if you're playing against them. For example, in MD5, Furuhashi and Maeda from Celtic both had excellent EV, and Maeda went on to score 10 or 11 points, I think, in MD5 against Club Brugge. So if that's the case, then I'm thinking,
Sorry, your voice cut out.
oh, is it audible now?
Your voice just cut out a little bit.
Oh, is it still the case or is it okay now?
No, no, it's better now. It's
Okay,
normal now.
perfect, perfect. So, like I was saying, Club Brugge is an opponent where I was expecting to see a lot more, And even though Gyökeres has not been as uh, prolific as when Amorim was their manager, I was still thinking this is the ideal time to bet against the crowd with him because no one was going to play him, and you did the same. So I'm just a little miffed that that didn't work out. But Hanko is another one,
Yeah,
and I'm sort of mixing agendas here because we are definitely going to address this later on. But I felt like Hanko is one player who is consistently underperforming what the model says his expected value is going to be. And one of the reasons is I think his change to center back from when he was playing fullback. So that has definitely contributed to this. And I probably need to look at how to tweak the model so that this is picked up much quicker. Because no doubt he scored against. Did he score against City or was it someone else? I think he has one goal, right?
yeah, yeah. It was Kim City.
Yeah, yeah, against
Yeah, it was
City.
City. I transferred him out that week.
Oh yeah. Oh damn. And also he I think scored one own goal against Bayer Leverkusen. And I don't remember if there was another own goal. Perhaps it was given to him and then changed, but we can probably quickly look into it because I was thinking he's also been extremely unlucky. Oh yeah, he's sorry, he's conceded one penalty. It's not an own goal. He conceded a penalty.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not been great, although he has one goal and one assist. So that's an interesting case for me to look into how players like him consistently are rated highly, and if there's something that should probably temper expectations when it comes to EV for players like him. And Vitina is another one, right? I think I don't know. Vitina's ball recoveries have fallen off a cliff, and it's extremely difficult to predict BRs as it is just because UCL have
Yeah,
some weird version of ball recoveries which no other
yeah.
stats provider is agreeing with. So I've had to build a separate model just to convert UCL sorry the ball recoveries recognized by all stats providers into UCL ball recoveries. So it's not the cleanest solution, but I don't see a better way out of it. So maybe there's something to be looked at there, but apart from that, I think you've been fairly unlucky, I would say, in terms of Bayern not getting a clean sheet and uh, you know Jonathan David being Jonathan David. Holland is an interesting pick before we move on because I
Yeah.
don't want to spend a lot of time on just one MD, but what was the reasoning behind keeping Holland? Was it again just betting against the crowd because no one was going to own him?
I think the striker spot was the one I was most uncertain on. I tried
Hmm.
to sell Gyökeres 30 seconds before the deadline, but
Okay.
then I realized I had triple PSG, so I couldn't get to Ramos anyway. Um, I wasn't confident enough on Alvarez's minutes.
Hmm.
Griezmann's one of my favorite players, so
Yeah.
I would have taken any excuse to get him, but I was even less confident of his minutes.
Yes.
At which point there weren't many strikers I liked. I think Ramos was my next choice, but I had triple PSG anyway. And Holland, I would imagine his ownership in higher ranks would have been quite low, and his goal projections were still quite good from memory.
Hmm.
Even though Juventus have been good, it's still City and they can still score goals. So I think ultimately it was just down to a lack of confidence in other strikers' minutes, which is why I had Holland and Gyökeres because I knew they would get 90s.
Fair enough. And I think I don't want to spend too much time hindsight analyzing what MD6 was. So, like you, I had a very bad Limitless chip last season. I think I scored like 40 points on Limitless. It was horrendous. So,
Same.
yeah. So, this season was substantially better. And there's a couple of players I need to thank. First of all, is Musiala, obviously, who scored 11 points and should have had a goal. I don't know if you
Right.
saw the Shakhtar game, but I have no idea why that
Yeah, I
goal
did.
was chalked off. I mean, what are we doing here? Is this, yeah, the game's gone.
You make some interesting decisions.
Yeah, I don't know if you had a chance to look at my team. So I got 10 returns. The only player who did not return was Theo Hernandez, and that's why I'm a little peeved at him even more than I usually am. And Trent and Allison was a call I made just because I had the information. So I have it's perhaps a quirk, I would say, where knowing a team's lineup, I rank that very high on my list of uh,
Yeah.
information, or I weigh it very highly. So the fact that I knew Trent and Allison were starting was the only reason I chose them over someone like Donnarumma or Raya, because again I could have easily gone with Raya. The other reason was Raya and Oblak play on the same day, and Oblak had the highest expected value amongst
Right.
all goalkeepers. So I could not pick Raya, and which is why I went with Allison. So you're right. There are some decisions where they don't look as if they are made using the model, but it's just based on information I weigh. And the Barcola man of the match, I could not understand. I think Hakimi should have gotten man of the match probably, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not going to begrudge them too much because that actually allowed me to keep him in the team. Because if Hakimi had gotten man of the match, I would not have had enough players to sub out. So, like you, with was it who was it? There's one player that you sort of, yeah, Rafina. So you kept Rafina, right? And I did the same with Florian Wirtz, where I just thought, okay, this game is extremely difficult, and I don't envision a lot of points because Inter's defense is tremendous. So it's just a bet where, okay, I'm keeping him and hoping that even if he blanks, I have other players to cover him. So Words is one decision I would definitely uh, approach differently if given the chance all over again. But I think I have some scars from last season's Bellingham, where I kept betting against Bellingham because he was on
Yeah.
an obscene run and it didn't work out, and I just kept losing rank every single week. So maybe it was some of that, and I hate that I did that. But hopefully, if I get the chance to do it all over again, I would not do that. But same with you for Griezmann. The minutes weren't there, and a lot of outlets had him benched. So yeah, I don't think there's
Yeah.
anything wrong with not picking Griezmann. So I think we can probably move
If we'd
on.
seen the lineups, I think I'd
Yeah. Sorry, there's a lag by the way.
yeah.
So feel free to interrupt me if you have already
Oh,
started speaking. So that's the only reason I'm talking over you sometimes. It's just because there's some lag between when you speak and when it reaches me.
yeah, I was saying if the Atletico game was on the first day, I would have definitely had
Yep.
triple Atletico
Yep.
and captain one of them.
100%. There is no doubt about that. And I would have done the same because if I knew Griezmann was starting, I would have upped his minutes to 90 just to see what sort of EV he would have ended up on. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure he would not never have played 90 even if the score were nil-nil at 70 minutes. But that was just my thought process. So I just decided to hedge by getting one Atletico player, and I'm glad it worked out. It could have worked out even better, but like you said, Griezmann, I don't think I was ever considering. And Saka again, like it's obscene, right? So it's a perfect example of you consider all competitions because he's blanked 3 weeks in a row in FPL, but he's had 19 points in UCL. So over 4 game weeks, he's probably matched whatever his career average rate is when it comes to goals and assists.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can probably move on
I think
to.
Saka and Trent.
Sorry,
I
please go on.
was I was very close to getting Saka, Trent, and Robertson, but
Mm,
last minute just decided not to, which is kind of annoying, but
yeah,
it happens.
yeah, absolutely. I think the Robertson man of the match was also pretty weird because I think Allison should have won it. He prevented like 1.4
I agree.
XG. So I just don't know why they did that. But anyway, I'm not, if I keep complaining about UCL panel, whatever plan, the man of the match panel, then we would be here all day. So the next segment is going to be talking through maybe some or selective decisions that you felt were key to, let's say, uh, getting you to this point in MD6. So I'm going to walk through MDs. And first of all, you can see this properly, or do I need to make it a bit larger for you to see?
No, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Uh,
It's clear.
Awesome. Yeah. So for MD1, I'm going to say that captaining Kane was the biggest thing that week. So if there's anything specific you wanted to talk about, I'll let you have the floor. For example, double city defense is something that catches my eye, and having Chalanoglu as well, because I think there was some doubts over whether he was going to start, but let me know your thoughts on that.
Çalhanoğlu's had consistently good EV, which is why I
Hmm.
picked him.
Yep.
But in hindsight, I was overestimating his minutes by a lot.
Hmm.
I think setting his X mins to 80 plus was just wrong. So I kind of got lucky
Hmm.
in that sense. But I mean, if he did get the minutes, he's good.
Yeah.
Ball recoveries, penalties, man of the match chances intuitively seem high. I got very lucky with City defense actually. At one point, I was going for Lewis
Hmm.
uh, instead of Diaz, which would have been nicer. But I think until a few minutes before the deadline, I had Edison and Gabriel for Diaz and Raya, or some combination of that. And then Edison just kept on getting benched.
Hmm.
And then I would have had Di Gregorio, who got a red card soon. So I got very lucky that I avoided Edison, and I just knew how good City's defense was. It's not necessarily true anymore, but at that point, they were looking good. And I thought that doubling up on their defense was just a good way to increase risk relative to the field,
Hmm.
especially given that you can sub off
Gregorio,
players.
who got
I was happy to take that chance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, the biggest I think, I'm not going to say win, but I was happy that the model was vindicated when Pedro Gonçalves assisted Gyökeres, because the model was high on both players, and I also went with both, obviously, because uh, Pedro Gonçalves was giving a lot of Galeno vibes for some reason, because last season's
Yeah.
biggest model win obviously was Galeno for people that were playing UCL Fantasy last season. So I guess that I'm glad that worked out. Just sort of interest for my team, I think the one bit where I deviated from, let's say, a purely expected value approach was I decided that I would have one player with who's going to be a budget enabler. Just because I was thinking, even though they don't have good EV and there's better ways to have more expected value in your team, if that one player can play, let's say, is fairly nailed on to play 70 to 80 minutes, then I can play them when needed, and if not, then I just don't play them. So in that way, Kuhn worked out beyond my wildest dream because of his brace against RB Leipzig. But other than that, I was thinking when Kane scored all those goals that if you didn't captain him, probably your season was over. And that was definitely not the case. I've seen plenty of teams where they didn't captain Kane in game week one and they're doing just fine now. But it's just about impetus, right? It's just a mental thing. There's nothing to do with how your team actually performs or your UCL team gets you points for all six MDs.
Yeah, it was quite a large swing in match day one as well. Like Barcelona got a red card. I
Hmm.
imagine plenty people would have captained
Yep.
Rafinha or Yamal.
Yep.
So a bit unlucky there.
Yeah, I mean, Yamal was not that unlucky just because he scored and he was the only player attacker who got points in MD1. But I think Emre Can as well, because Emre Can gave the penalty to Girassi,
Hmm.
and that I think he did
Right.
that in
Yeah.
MD2 as well, which was extremely annoying because uh, the whole reason we went with Emre Can was because he was on penalties supposedly, and I didn't want to miss out on
Right.
fantasy folklore by not having a player like that. But like you said, it's all about some events that are unforeseen, and that was one of those where Barcelona losing to Monaco was definitely not on my bingo card for MD1. So for MD2, I see that you have Trincao, and definitely he had good EV. So what was the thought process behind, let's say, switching from Gonçalves to his teammate rather than moving on to, let's say, someone like Ademola Lookman?
I Lookman was my preference. I don't think I could afford him though. I think I
Oh,
was just short.
oh,
Oh no, wait, sorry. This week actually, I no, I think Trincao just had better short-term fixtures,
hmm,
and I would gain some flexibility in terms of money in the bank. And I knew I wanted to roll my second transfer, so I thought that extra flexibility could help me reassess in the future with regards to Lukman.
Hmm.
It was a very close decision actually, now that I think of it. But I was also happy to take on some of the risk, considering the EV gap wasn't much on my minutes, and my minutes were quite pessimistic off Lukman.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that is a fair
Plus,
assessment.
I just thought Trinkau would get more responsibility in the team without Goncalves.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking because you owned Rafina in MD2, uh, did that tempt you for Limitless 3 or Wildcard 3? Because the Bayern Barcelona game for a lot of players was a deterrent, right? To invest more into either Barcelona or Bayern Munich. But you seem to have been agnostic to that fixture just because the EV would still be reasonable, right? It wasn't great for obviously for both teams, but you can ride that, and then again the fixtures are great for both teams.
Yeah, and I think that Trincao also had Sturm Graz the next match day, and his EV for those 2 weeks in particular were a lot
Hmm.
higher. And I was quite uncertain of that spot long term, so I was happy to somewhat go shorter term there.
Oh, you're talking about Trincao? I was actually referring to Triple Barcelona and Kane.
Oh, oh, was this the week? No, okay. I
No,
thought
no.
this was the week Kunde got 2 assists, but no, your voice had cut out a little bit in the middle.
Oh, my bad.
I think I was
So
disconnected for a few seconds.
yeah, yeah. So I was saying that Barcelona Bayern played each other in MD3, right? And my thought process behind removing players from Barcelona or Bayern Munich was I don't want six or five players in MD3 playing each other in a pretty difficult game. It turned out to be a whitewash, but that's besides the point. I was thinking I can
Mm.
sort of sidestep that, and that would then mean that I don't need to wildcard or limitless in that game week because people that did limitless obviously transferred out Rafina and in MD3, and obviously that
Yeah.
proved out to be a disastrous decision.
I think for a few seconds I was considering using my limitless there, but
Hmm.
I just thought there's more value in holding the chip and rolling another free transfer, which I could use to sort out my players.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, one thing I would also point out that your decision to have Raya and De Gregory was excellent, and one of the key mistakes I think I made this season was to start off with two 4.5 goalkeepers and have Gabriel here. Because what that did was, and I spoke with Fran about this as well, because Fran went with Raya as well, and he was actually vociferously
Yeah.
critical of people that went with cheap goalkeepers. Uh, and that made actually a lot of sense to go with Raya, just because if you have all of your key players as defender or your best kind of clean sheet percentages in defense and not none of them as goalkeepers, there could be a situation where you won't be able to play all your defenders or you won't be able to adjust your team such that you get all of the clean sheet percentages in your team. So one of the best ways to sidestep that was to just have Raya play him every single MD, and then all around your defense you can then use different players, and I think you did that much better than I did because Kunde was I think a much better pick than someone like Gabriel, just because that would have allowed me also to have Raya every single game week rather than
Yeah.
De Gregorius -3 in MD2.
And Raya and Di Gregorio also rotated quite well. Like, I don't think there was an overlap in terms of the days they were playing for quite a while.
Yes, yes, that is true as well. One thing I would just mention briefly about my game week to MD2 was that Akliush, I bought him because he had fairly decent EV, and I absolutely uh, shortchanged my bench because I had the Nicholas Gerrit Kuhn, Akliush, and Kubarsi effectively. If you look at the three cheapest players, so
Yeah.
it's not the greatest situation, but with Akliush, unlike Kuhn, because Kuhn I knew would start every game, but his minutes were fairly 70-ish. He was never playing 90 minutes, and he only played 91 game, which was in MD6. So Akliush was someone who was playing all the minutes, so there was no doubt about that. And his EV had started to trend upwards. So that was one bet I'm glad turned out well. Even though I think Minamino was probably the best option, but he was a bit pricier than Akliush. So it's worked out this season. But if we simulate the same team, let's say for 1,000 times, I don't think my team is going to come out on top a lot of those times, just because it's very unstable with all these cheap enablers. There's too many cheap enablers. That's what I was thinking when I went into MD2. But at that point, I had already committed to Salah, Holland, Kane, all the expensive players.
Yeah,
So yeah, I just had to roll with that. And I think Foden has been a big anomaly, right? I'm sure you because
right.
you just have you write about football and you're a big fan of players. I'm assuming you must be a fan of Foden as well, just because of his technical abilities. And it's been really weird that he hasn't scored a single goal in Premier League this season, and he's scored points for he's scored double digit hauls for three consecutive game weeks in Champions League Fantasy.
I was quite disappointed that I couldn't get to Foden,
Hmm.
but I was tripled up anyway.
Yeah,
But also it's quite an awkward price point. I feel like he was
it
around
is.
9 million. Maybe I'm mixing it up with, yeah. So getting that was a bit of an issue, especially with my structure.
No, absolutely. See, that's why I had to buy a Clues, just because I wanted Foden so much because of his expected value.
Yeah,
And again, it's worked out this time,
yeah.
but it's not a great strategy to replicate. So let's get back to match day three. We've already probably discussed everything there is to match day three. Of course, Rafinha's 21 pointers is perhaps the biggest plus point in that gaming for you. One more thing that perhaps I should mention is Gyökeres, right? There were a lot of players on the second day,
Yes.
and I also kept the armband on Gyökeres after the first day. So, what was your thought process there? Is it just simply he's already outperformed any expected value for any player that week? So, what's the point in switching?
Largely it was that, but I
Hmm.
think mentally I give some leeway to the fact that I have players playing on match day too, so I am willing to sacrifice some EV.
Hmm.
I just think 9 points is a good enough threshold.
Yeah.
Like if you're captaining another striker, you need them to score a goal and get man of the match. Considering UEFA, you never know if that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Even with a midfielder, goal is like not necessarily going to beat 9 points.
Yeah.
I feel like quite often people underestimate what it takes to get to 9 points, which is why so many people twist their captaincy at times that I wouldn't necessarily do the same.
Hmm.
But maybe that's just personal preference.
No, absolutely. And I think, like you said, just a very simple example. Holland played on match day on the second day, and he had to score two goals just to get to 10 points. And Foden ended up with man of the
Yeah.
match anyway. So that's a perfect example of why you're you need to set a threshold beforehand, because once the events have happened,
Yes.
there's no use in you deciding a threshold after the fact. So yeah, that's a great insight. And we are getting close to obviously the point in the season where there was one player who absolutely did bits for you. So just quickly going through my team again, it's fairly similar to yours. I think Hakimi is the one player I had to buy because his EV was excellent that week and he managed to score. So that was a big positive for my team. But again, I had to buy Majeki because Di Gregorio was suspended and Blaswich was out of favor, and Schlager managed to get himself sent off, who was the other goalkeeper for Salzburg. So he played anyway. That's the whole thing. So yeah, it's just a mess. And I envied Raya owners ever since match day 2 all the way till match day 6. So hopefully I can buy him next week, next MD, and just be done with this whole cheap goalkeeper thing. So we, of course, come to match day 4 and your star boy Malik Tillman. So just tell me why did you go there and what prompted you to captain him?
I was initially very uncertain. I knew he had good EV, but and I looked at like FPF and everything. His underlying data was just ridiculous.
Hmm.
But there were two main doubts I had. One was obviously the Dutch league and how that would translate over into the Champions League,
Hmm.
but also the fact that he played as a winger sometimes, and predicted lineups had him playing as a midfielder in the Champions League. So, I mean, intuitively, I assumed his ball recoveries would go up, but his goal threat would go down significantly. But I noticed that even on conservative minutes, I think I had him on like 75. He was in and around the top five midfielders, and he was a lot cheaper than most of the top five midfielders, like Wirtz, for example. Um, and then when I was looking at captaincy, him and Holland were nearly equal, but they were actually very close with Tillman on 76 minutes, I think. But when I saw that Tillman had been getting 90s and could quite conceivably get another 90, I thought that it's a free risk option. It was a very close decision, but I just wanted some free risk, and that worked out well.
Oh, it worked out splendidly.
Yeah, I think it was one of the most enjoyable. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I was going to
it
say,
was
and
one of the most enjoyable match days I've had.
it was on day two, right? Or was it day one? I think it was day two.
No, it was day one.
Oh, day one. Okay,
It was day
perfect.
one,
Yeah, so
I
you
think.
didn't even need to switch captaincies
Yeah,
once that was done.
yeah.
Uh, One thing that I was looking at when setting minutes for PSV players, I was looking at players like Gustil, and Gustil plays for PSV,
Hmm.
right? I'm not getting that wrong. I
Yeah, he
just had
does.
a, yeah.
He does. He does.
Okay, okay. And Ricardo Pepi and Malik Tillman.
Yeah.
And I was looking at their minutes in Eredivisie, and I was just thinking, if there's one player who could actually play 90, it's going to be Malik Tillman. So he
Hmm.
was in and around my thoughts. So if I just briefly go into to my team, obviously I did not own him, but and I did not own Words. So in a strange way, both of us had a player who was very lowly owned who managed to cover Florian Words in this game week. Because Florian Wirtz has been exactly like Jude Bellingham this season, just getting man of the match for breathing.
True.
Like once he breathes, it's over. Like uh, I think was it against Brest where he didn't do any, like he though no goals, no assist, and still ended up on 7 points or something. It was ridiculous. Or was it Milan? I think. No, sorry, my bad. It was Milan. His game against Milan. And I was extremely irritated by Florian Wirtz this season until
Hmm.
MD4, obviously. But yeah, for me it was Nicholas Gerrit Kuhn who scored from outside the box. And UCL Fantasy is such a weird game that they had given him both goals from outside the box, even though the second goal was like a tap in. So I was thinking, if this stands, then this
Wait,
entire game is
actually,
just useless.
did it stand,
No, 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 it didn't. So he was on
or did they
17
change
points.
it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He was on 17 points till
Okay.
fairly into midnight CET, and then he went back to 16 points. So that was actually a very pivotal point for me because if he had remained on 17 points, there's really no meaning to the game because I mean anyone can get any points if
Yep.
that's the case. So I'm glad that did not happen. Other than that, yeah, this was fairly uneventful. Kane got an assist against Benfica. I think this was, yeah, it was against Benfica. Yeah, very, very ordinary week for me. Again, oh, I forgot about this. I have to mention this. This is the week where I forgot to make moves for the deadline because Dortmund were playing Sturm Graz, and my
Ah.
planned moves were Gyökeres to Girassi and Foden to Bino Gittins. And Girassi, I think, got an
Oh.
assist, and Bino Gittins blanked. So they scored 8 points between them, and I got Gyökeres plus Foden, there's 25 points between them because I forgot the deadline. I also got an additional transfer to use in MD5 as well, even though I burnt a transfer. But that is one of the craziest things that has happened to me. And no wonder, because everything has been going right in UCL, that everything is going wrong in FPL. So it's like even within the season, it's getting leveled off in a weird way. So let's jump back to your team and MD5. Again, Tillman, 2 goals from outside the box. One was like a narrow free kick where I could not understand how that went in, and then the other one was just a screamer. So yeah, again, I'm going to ask you to talk me through that. And also, you bought Florian Wirtz just like I did and captained him. So
Yep.
looks like we both made great moves.
Tillman scored two goals in the 87th and 90th minute
Yeah,
from .12 xG.
yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think at that moment he just definitively became one of my favorite players. He's genuinely quite a good player as well,
Yeah,
but like from a sentimental memory point of view,
yeah.
I think when he scored his second goal, I'd reached the gym and I'd done like a mini fist pump to celebrate. But then someone was walking past me and was giving me a very confused look. So I tried to play it off as if I was stretching my back. But he's just.
That's so good.
And yeah, I lost all hope at that moment because like it was the 87th minute of a
Hmm.
match and PSV won't really. I mean, they'd done very well up until that point. Shakhtar's goalkeeper, Riznik, I think, is it
Yeah.
still Riznik? He was just ridiculous. He made how many? He made 15 saves. So, and then, yeah, Florian Wirtz, the match was like, the EV was there, the fixture
Yeah.
was there. I was getting tired of him getting man of the match for doing everything like you were. And I think he was in and around the highest EV for captaincy, if not the highest. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, we'll get to captaincy recommendation performance later on, but
Yeah.
I believe he was second to Lewandowski, and we can use
Okay.
that case to discuss man of the match and how you can probably try to mentally account for your
Yeah.
own conviction, because I was so sure that Lewandowski would never get man of the match unless he scored a hat trick, because he did that, he did just that. He scored two
Yeah.
goals in the week before, and they gave it to Martinez, Inigo Martinez, because he scored a goal and kept a clean sheet. So it at that point I was just thinking, okay, these people clearly don't want to give it to him because they don't like that he's just scored
Mm.
tap ins or whatever it is, even though he's playing tremendously this season. And yeah, that's all I needed, just to captain words over him. And for you it was easier because you didn't own Lewandowski, so yeah, that made
Yeah.
it easier for you. Uh, Kim, I guess Kim scoring was also extraordinary for you because I don't think you would have ever expected him to get on the end of a set piece delivery like that.
Yeah, when I saw the notification for a Bayern goal, I'm like, okay, Harry Kane has finally got me some points. Then when I saw that it was Kim, it was just, it was a good moment, and I knew with ball recoveries he would get a decent points total. I didn't expect man of the match, but that was also quite nice.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
His ball recoveries, I think both Bayern centre backs have had quite decent
Oh yeah,
numbers in terms of ball recoveries.
yeah, absolutely. And this season's data is now helping them trend upwards in terms of expected value as well, because obviously the trend is that the way they're playing it just means that they're getting more ball recoveries. So I expect the longer this goes
Yeah.
on, the more their EV will start rising, and it's great that you already sort of recognize that, and you had Kim since MD1, I believe, because I've been looking at your team and I think he's been there since
Yeah, I
MD1.
did.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great shout. So for my MD5, same as you, Captain Words, it's actually a weird week because, and perhaps this is a good time to talk about something which I'm just going to quickly look at your team in MD1. Yes, so you didn't own a single Leverkusen player, and of course they just went crazy in that in MD1 because Grimaldo I think got an assist. Frimpong got two assists I think, and Words I think got like a goal or two goals. Yeah. So what was the what was the thought process behind skipping them? Because I know the EV wasn't there, and it's the same for me. I could not justify it, but then I was just thinking, could I hedge with just one player in case Feyenoord are not as great as I'm thinking them to be? So I don't know if you gave that a thought.
Sorry, your voice had, I think I was like disconnected for a few seconds. Can you
Oh, my
just
bad.
repeat that,
Yeah,
please?
I'm just going to condense the question. So the simple question is, did you consider any Leverkusen players for MD1, given that they did not have great EV?
Um, I think I considered votes. Yeah,
Hmm.
but fitting him into my team at that point was a bit of an issue. I think my structure was very mid-priced, mids favorable.
Hmm.
I think I was trying to get votes into the Çalhanoğlu spot, but I mean, I would have needed a fair few downgrades elsewhere.
Hmm. That makes sense. So the only reason
And
I
I
had,
didn't, and
sorry,
like with
sorry,
Grimaldo,
yeah.
I didn't expect clean sheets necessarily in the first two match days at least.
Hmm.
I think they played Feyenoord and Milan, and they had less than 50%. They had less than a 50% chance of a clean sheet in both those matches, I think. And then in match day four, they had Liverpool as well. So the fixtures weren't necessarily the best, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm with you right there. The only reason I had Grimaldo was I was hedging. If Leverkusen really do keep this up, then perhaps it's good to have at least one of their wing backs because they are extraordinary in attack. Like you know that already, but it's like you said, it's just a question of do you want them for those fixtures? And Milan and Liverpool in 2 and 4 were pretty bad, was my thought process as well. But I just thought, okay, let's start with one and stick with one. And unfortunately, words just kept getting man of the match until the Liverpool game. And I was thinking, okay, thank God there's at least one game where he finally blanked, where he was expected to blank. So if that had not happened, I think that would have
Right.
tilted me a fair few bit.
Yeah, but in match day five, when I did finally get in captain Wards, I was quite close to not getting him and getting Grimaldo instead, who I would have captained as well. So that was an interesting decision to have to make. I
Yeah,
think it just
yeah.
came down to the combination of players I could afford at that point.
Yeah, yeah, and because you've acknowledged Tillman's first goal, or rather the XG for the game, I also have to sorry, I also have to acknowledge that that penalty was never a penalty that Leverkusen got. It was such a farce. I mean, I don't understand how they ever gave it a penalty,
Mm.
but it's just it's calamitous from the referee. So I'm glad I got that, but I can understand like what people who still don't own words must be feeling because I was on that end and you were as well for the first three match days. So yeah, I think
Right.
that's enough about our teams. Unless you have something just to close it off in terms of the first six MDs.
No, I think in hindsight, I'm happy with most of my decisions. I should probably be more confident in those decisions,
Hmm.
but I've gotten fairly lucky and it's worked out decently, except for match day six, but that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can just move on to the next section, which is the captaincy matrix performance. And I appreciate that it's a lot of data for people to look at. So I would just urge, if you want a better look at this data, to pause it and just have a gander at all the data that is on the screen. So just to narrate what's on the screen here, it's essentially comparing the X-min CV, so pre-match expectation, R-min CV, which is the post-match expectation, given the fact that the player played a certain number of minutes, real points, as in the points they got in the game, and what is the difference between real points and real means EV and real points. So first things first, obviously, when a player scores 21 points, it's always going to be a crazy deficit because that's just not within the realms of any prediction. The interesting thing, and I'll get Instinctive's opinion on how he's looked at the captaincy recommendations that I've posted on X versus the adjustable minutes model, because I'm sure if you adjusted minutes, maybe some other players popped up which are not included in the recommendation. But first things first, as you can see, most of the MD1 recommendations did not do well. The key thing being that the player with the most EV, if you captained him, then all of the other players are irrelevant. So if you did that, then it's fine. If you didn't do that, Mbappe was the highest choice on game week on day two, and even he at least got a return. And then Yamal was second for match day three. So if you went Lewandowski, then yeah, commiserations. But if you managed to go Yamal, then again he scored 8 points. So apart from that, MDs 2 to 6 are pretty much what I would expect. There's the odd player, like for example Havertz in MD3, who gave the penalty to Trossard, and I had 95% pen share to Kai Havertz, which is why he was right up there. And him giving the penalty to Trossard when he was on the verge of breaking Robin van Persie's record for scoring in most consecutive games at Emirates is something that I could never wrap my mind around. So that's an anomaly that can be explained. The second anomaly is obviously Retegui, who only played 59 minutes because it's impossible to predict what Gasperini is going to do for Atlanta, and we can come to that section when we talk about X-Men's, but it's always going to be a gamble. So 59 minutes, if you were told, he would never have been on this list, but pre-match expectations, it was reasonable to expect he would play more minutes. Other than that, Jamie Gittens blanking against Sturm Graz is something I think Dortmund as a whole, I don't know, just underwhelmed in that game. So that's probably something that is one of those events. And Furuhashi, I would say, because Maeda scored a goal and got, I think, man of the match. Uh, yeah, Furuhashi is just unlucky and got subbed at the same time as Maeda. So if you went there, my commiseration. Same with Vitina. We've already discussed Vitina, so I don't need to rehash that. So, Instinctive, your thoughts, and if do you have anything to add in terms of how you're utilizing this?
Yeah, so I do mainly use the adjustable minutes model,
Hmm.
and then I play around with the minutes within a certain range to see where the expectation lies, which is why things like Matchday 4 and the Tillman captaincy
Hmm.
happened because I was playing with Tillman's minutes, and beyond a certain threshold, the EV gets close enough to Holland, whose threshold I was a lot more bullish on, where it makes sense to captain him. But I think captaincy in UCL Fantasy is quite interesting in the sense that you have to mentally account for a certain range for day two.
Hmm.
I suppose you could seed some EV in match day one and go for like additional risk because you have something to fall back on,
Yep.
which is sort of been my thought process across this season. And next, I use a lot of, I check the markets as well to
Hmm.
see how projections change near the deadline.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But
So,
yeah,
sorry. Yeah.
captaincy, I quite like that you can change it. No, I like that you have two options between 2 days. That adds almost a game theory like perspective, which is quite different to FPL.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the philosophy that you mentioned of taking more risk on first day of any match day probably is a good strategy. But again, if you look at match day one and people who did that, I am sure they must be lamenting that because
Yeah.
you are never going to get 21 points out of any other player. But if you look at, let's say, not just this season, but if we take, let's say, the last 6 seasons of UCL Fantasy, I think what you would find is it's probably better to hedge, no, sorry, take more risk on match day one, or rather day one, and then
Yeah.
fall back to the best EV option for match day two or something like that. So completely agree with that thought process. It's just that I think in MD1 Kane was so clear of anyone else
Yeah.
that yeah, it didn't make any sense for you and I both, and I think a lot of other people as well. He was massively captained. It's not like the model was giving some
Hmm.
insane insight. So I'm not going to claim that as a win because I think he was the most popular captain in that week. Other than that, I also saw that Asensio was there, and Asensio is also a case where he didn't start, and I saw a lot of outlets predicting him to start over Randall Kolomuani. So yeah, that just it's unlucky that that happened. And Nabry is a weird one because I'm pretty sure Instinctive has also looked at FBref for Nabry, and he has some of the most obscene XA XG numbers that you've seen. So it's been very weird with Nabry because he was playing so well in Bundesliga, racking up goals, assists, XG, XA, and he's never really replicated that in this season's Champions League. So it's the exact opposite of Foden, I would say, where Foden did all his work in UCL Fantasy and he's been pretty ineffective in the Premier League. So I don't know if you've been following Nabry, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, since 2017, his npxG plus xag has never fallen below zero point 0.7. So I
Hmm.
knew that if Nabry had minutes, I would want to go there because
Hmm.
with minutes, he's just an incredible asset.
Yeah.
I think my issue in match day one was budget or
Hmm.
team structure, which meant I couldn't go there. I also wasn't sure if he would start, which in hindsight was quite wrong because I think he, like most outlets, had him predicted to start.
Hmm.
So if I was more confident of his minutes, I think I would have sacrificed my team elsewhere to get him in just because of what he could do. He would have been an interesting captaincy option as well. Eh, I mean, yeah, if he has the minutes, there aren't many better options, I don't think.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also on the same wavelength. But the thing is, it's people always look at obviously results, and the results have been extremely poor for him, and that just meant that
Yeah.
after a certain point, I think when his minutes also started falling off, that was the right time to jump off of someone like him. I think I jumped off of him after before the Bayern Barca game because and he did end up assisting in that game, so it's not like he
Mm.
blanked. And I think he also assisted in the Villa game, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, it wasn't as bad as perhaps I or maybe someone else remembers, but it definitely wasn't the best. Yeah, he got sorry, he didn't assist against Villa. It was only against Barcelona, and then he's not even played. He played 18 minutes against PSG, so I think he's firmly dead as an asset right now. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
at least the thought process was right when we went for him. So the next part is just going through FBref. There's not going to be a lengthy section. It's just trying to see if we can spot some not trends, I would say, but players maybe that we would expect to have see a boost in their expected value. Because in a month's time, I'm assuming that I'll have enough expected data for this season that I will crank up the weightage for this season's expected value, underlying statistics, which would then mean that there would be some movement for players like Gurasi or maybe even someone like I don't know, Olise. And Olise is a weird one, right? Because he hasn't had the minutes, but whenever he's played, he's racked up a fair few goals and assists and XGXA as well. So have you first of all have you looked at this and do you have any players that you are sort of tracking to see if they get an EV boost?
Uh, Not particularly from a goals and assists point of view, maybe from like a ball recovery standpoint,
Hmm.
but that's a different topic entirely. I think that must be difficult to model as well because I don't know what UEFA really think when they're accounting for ball recoveries. That was an issue during the Euros as well.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, intuitively, I don't think there's someone who's really shocked me from an output point of view. Lookman's data has been quite good recently, so maybe him, but I think the EV accurately reflects the uptake he's had recently.
Okay, that's encouraging to know. I was just looking at XG per 90, and of course, we should probably look at npxG because there's been a fair few penalties this season. And of course, we need to ignore people like Sorloth or even, I don't know, Retegui's played minutes, but again, Gasperini is just, I don't know how to account for what he does. So, like you said, I don't think there's been a lot of revelations after 6 match days for players EV to shift a lot. But I was also this is an interesting tidbit because I've also started publishing market odds XG, npxG, and not npxG, XG and XA.
Yeah,
And Benfica are, I think everyone who does like who's publishing odds actually hates Benfica because their odds are never available closer to deadline. They are the team that always have their odds available at, let's say, 2 hours before kickoff and never before that. So I just don't understand what's happening there. I mean, I don't know if you have heard about anything, but it's just it's hilarious and also kind of unprofessional from bookies.
mm, I mean, my only guess would be that it's very lineup dependent, but that just seems wrong.
Yeah, it
Like,
is.
there's
Yeah.
no one necessarily that should change things by that amount.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't think there's any legislation for for doing that. But again, like I said, it's just going to be uh, an interesting adjustment once I incorporate this data. And ball recoveries, I think you're right. I'm also just to let you and anyone who's watching this know that for ball recoveries, I've already made sure that this season's ball recoveries, as defined by UEFA, have been included because that is the only way for the model to keep up with this whatever weird definition that they have. If I don't do that, then it's going to start recommending. We can quickly look at this. I think it should be. I think it's in miscellaneous stats. I might be wrong, but yeah, it's in miscellaneous stats. Yeah. So again, you that was a great shot from you. Malik Tillman has had the third most ball recoveries as defined by FBref in this season's Champions League, and he is nowhere near that number in the game. So it's become really weird to factor this in. And if I factor this in, it's going to prop up Tillman even more, which I'm fine with because Tillman has already vindicated the model, but I fear that it would shoot him up even beyond whatever you are expecting.
I would just like any excuse to have him in my team at this point. Unfortunately, he's suspended, so
Yes, yeah. Other than that, I think you also shouted out Chalanoglu, and he's also here. So I think you looking at FBRF has sort of uh, built an intuition for you, but unfortunately, when it comes to ball recoveries, that intuition might not be even close to
yeah.
correct as far as fantasy is concerned. Because I'm looking here and I don't see either of the Bayern center backs. And I believe they are close
Mm.
to top two for ball recoveries this season in the game. So yeah, that's just another example of how convoluted this is. And yeah, if you have any final thoughts, we can move on to the next one.
No, I think Çalhanoğlu's ball recovery stats genuinely just impressed me here because he's had limited minutes as well. I think
Yeah,
he hasn't started a few with injuries,
yeah,
and even when he starts, he's subbed off early. So that's quite interesting.
yep. That's a great point actually.
Even if
And
it somewhat translates, yeah, even if it somewhat translates over into UCL Fantasy, that's a lot of points to be had, especially with penalties and set pieces.
that yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm looking at per 90 stats now, and yeah, I mean Akanji is someone I always knew would be here just because of Euro 2024. Once I saw that
Mm.
he was just
Right.
eating ball recoveries for breakfast, and yeah, that was probably going to translate into here as well. Okay, so the next bit is I don't know. This is not a demonstration because I've already done that, but this is more about again. I want to cover maybe a portion or the final bit about your expense philosophy or how you input expense, and also how people can best use this model because I think you are probably the person I know who uses this model in the best way possible. So if you have any insights, then yeah, please share them.
I adjust X-Mins a lot. Like, mm, how much ever time I have, I just spend it. How much ever time I have for UCL Fantasy, I spend in adjusting the minutes, and then like it eventually makes me happy when I can filter the tables and see who actually now has the highest EV on my minutes.
Hmm,
It's difficult for Champions League fantasy because of the amount of players that are there and the
yeah.
amount of leagues it covers,
Hmm,
and obviously you can't focus so much on so many different leagues. So I would say my predictions for Premier League players are a lot better than other leagues as a whole But there are specific teams like Barcelona and Madrid that you just are somewhat knowledgeable of. Madrid, for example, you'll just get the lineup
Yeah.
a while in advance. So that's not much of an issue. But roughly, what I find to be quite decent is I look at past minutes, I create some sort of aggregate, see if they're predicted to start in the next week, and test out what I expect them to get on the lower range of those minutes. So if someone's been getting consistent 80s, I would put them on 75 and see how they would show up on the model and eventually ramp it up to 80, but just compare it with the worst possible scenario, for example, just to see if they are still viable in that scenario as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's I think the best strategy with a limited amount of time because, like you said, it doesn't make sense to go through all 943 players right now in the game
Yeah.
and adjust all of their minutes. And a hilarious incident is I'm trying to think of which player this is who scored for. Wait, I'm just going to pull this up because this was so bad. And UCL Fantasy is notorious for this stuff, but I had posted this in the
Oh, yeah, I think
analytics
I know what
Discord.
you're talking about. Yeah.
Let me quickly try to
Oh,
see
yeah,
if
someone hadn't transferred. Yeah.
this, it's so bad. So, for example, Simpson Pusey wasn't even in the game when he.
Hmm.
I mean, to be fair, I think he got like 0 or -1 point to be honest, because Gyökeres absolutely dunked on him in that game. But
Yeah.
that's besides the point, right? You you want the players to be in the game in order for you to at least be a little confident about the game mechanics. So
Hmm.
I'm just trying to see why can't I find this quickly? It's so bad.
It was an Atalanta. It was an Atalanta player, I think.
Atlanta player, you're right, absolutely right. It was definitely an Atlanta player, but what? Yeah. So Mitchell Baker is an Atlanta player in the game, and he scored for Lille. And because of that, they
Hmm.
didn't give him any points for that goal, which is just it's just absurd. I don't
That's
understand.
ridiculous. Yeah.
It is, yeah, and I'm probably hurting my own credentials because I'm doing so well in this game, and it's probably in my best interest to stop talking about these incidents. But I don't care, to be honest. It's just it's objectively bad. It's you can't this
Yeah.
can't be happening in a game. So I hope they shape up and stop put an end to this. I don't see how they will because this is not the first time and this will definitely not be the last time they do stuff like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we just have to hope
Did,
that it's not too
didn't
much.
he get didn't he get man of the match as well, or am I imagining things?
So
I
again,
feel like he did.
let me quickly check because
I mean, he
there's
wouldn't have gotten the points, but
no. So it's more difficult. It's not as easy as just going into the app and checking, right? I don't think he did, but let me quickly see.
oh,
Yeah, no, he didn't.
oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, and
So.
one last thing on minutes is in match day one when I was adjusting minutes, I manually deleted match day eight because I knew that I would use a chip in and around match day eight
Hmm.
if my plan was to go as long as I could with my chips,
Hmm.
and I didn't want the EV to be influenced by an outlier of a game week, so to speak.
So would
Especially
you?
with rotation and everything, it's just a bit difficult to predict match day eight.
Yeah, yeah. So would you use something like? So this is the whole reason I had different filters, right? So you could have used something like MD5 to 7 or 6 to 7, just so you could ignore that match day.
Yeah,
Yeah, that makes a
and
lot
I
of sense.
think I ended up I applied a weightage to match day 6 and 7 as well, I think. So they were valued a little less than 1 to 5
Oh,
because I
that's
think
nice.
trying to predict nearly 5 months yeah, trying to predict 5 months in advance was a bit of a optimistic task.
Yeah, yeah, that's a long shot for sure. That's yeah, I can appreciate that. Other than that, I'm just trying to think of if there's anything else we spoke about before we started streaming that I wanted to cover here. So maybe we can talk about Atlanta, right? A team like Atlanta, where decisively it is known that Gasparini just rotates. There's no method to this supposed madness. So Lookman, look, we missed out on a couple of hauls, right? He definitely, I think he got two man of the matches
Yeah.
till now. Uh, and in one of those games, he got subbed at 70-ish again. So I celebrated for
Mhm.
the Armin's EV win, but of course, there's no point in that because players people got all the points. But would you just ignore someone like that? Because was it Belanova who was also benched when everyone expected him to start? And Kolasinac seems to be the one player who is probably fairly nailed, I guess, in defense right now. So, how would you approach players like Retegui, De Ketelaere, Belanova, Kolasinac, and Lukman?
I think I was very close to buying Lookman actually, but then I think Gasparini said something about his fitness,
Yes,
which made me even less certain of his minutes.
yes.
Yeah, so at that point, I just decided not to go there. And I think I would have the rest on low enough minutes that they just aren't options. Not that I don't want them to be options, but at my minutes, it doesn't make sense to go there. If they're not an issue this week, they may be an issue next week.
Yeah,
And if I'm trying to just roll transfers, that's not viable. And I think Lookman was an incredible option. De Ketelaere, I feel like there was doubt around whether or not he would take
hmm.
penalties. If it was guaranteed, maybe I would have been more tempted, but I not to that extent. Also, he didn't get man of the match when he got like 5 goal contributions, I think, which is just I don't know how to
Yeah,
explain that.
yeah, yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. And to your point about DK Talara, he did not have a lot of penalty share in the model as well. So, like you, I
Yeah.
did not know if he would take penalties actually. It's weird if Retego is not on the pitch. I don't know what the situation was. So, unfortunately, the EV was just not there. Because Young Boys was a prime fixture, right? I was thinking whichever
Mm.
team or whichever players are going to whoever is going to play against them, it's easy to buy them. But then I was thinking if
Yep.
it was the
Lookman
early
was.
kickoff and people already knew Lukman was not playing.
Yep.
So I was actually irritated by the fact that
Hmm.
it's not going to benefit us, like people like you and I,
Yeah.
who were very pessimistic about
True.
his minutes. But then everyone got the information that he's not going to start. So that sort of irked me a little. But again, I mean, what can you do about it? It's just how the fixtures fall. So I assume you would probably consider them for MD8 because that's the only week where you get a wild card or you get unlimited transfers straight after that, and you don't need to worry about them, and you know the lineups.
Yeah. I definitely will. I mean, since you know the lineups, even the lower threshold of their minutes is not that low.
Hmm.
So like it's at least 45, you would
Yeah.
imagine, but
Yeah.
probably 60 for someone like Lookman.
Yeah.
So that's decent enough. And you don't have to like predict for the future as well, so
Yes.
less of a headache.
Yeah. So that's actually, I'm glad I brought that up. How are you going to approach MD 7 and 8, right? Because the wild card is probably going to set us up for both MDs. Both you and I are wildcarding in MD 7. So, because I was thinking with wild card, unlike previous seasons or unlike European Championship group stages or World Cup group stages, the last game of this season's group stage is not going to be a dead event because even though teams
Yeah.
have qualified they still want to finish higher as high as possible, so that just means it's easier for us to get more playing players. And my thought process is invest as much as I can into 11 to 12 players so that even if some players are benched, I don't need to bench a lot of money and I can have as much as I can on the field because we know all the we are going to know all the lineups for MD8 as well. So I guess the one drawback of our strategy is there was no way for us to get more than two free transfers for MD8 because however you played your chips, you would
Yeah.
always end up with two free transfers at the most or limitless, obviously. So how have you thought about the final two MDs?
I think my plan is still to get robust players for the most part, maybe one riskier pick,
Hmm.
because if something goes wrong, I have 2 transfers to use in match day 8 anyway, and match day 8 could be a good time to reallocate funds as well because, like you said, you don't need the bench.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna like give match day 7 too much of a higher weightage than 8, considering they're just a week apart.
Hmm.
And I only have two transfers again, like you said, so I don't feel like there's a point in taking too many risks, especially considering match day 8 inherently has some risk anyway. So something is probably going to come up. So I'm just going to plan as if there is a good chance I'm going to need two free transfers regardless. Like, even if it's not someone in my team getting benched, it could be something like the Atlanta lineups and someone suddenly becomes a viable option. So ideally, I wouldn't like to book in many transfers and just take it as they come.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a fair approach in terms of balancing information and also making sure that you're not too wedded to one particular match day. Because, like you said, if we weigh match day 7 or 8 too much, then there's likely to be a situation where we won't have enough free transfers to correct our teams for match day 8, or the other way around. We unnecessarily weaken our team for match day 7 for no reason. Because I think match day 7 is where us having a wild card should pay dividends based on the sheer fact that of like very few a very small percentage of the player base is actually going to have any chips left. So I
Yeah.
think if anything, maybe it should be something like 55-45 weighted towards MD7, just because you will have information of early kickoffs, and it's easy for us to take advantage, at least to some extent. Obviously, there's some fixture swings, which is why I think not a lot of people were considering this strategy between MD7 and 8. So I don't know, maybe hedging is the best way forward. I know you and I are both fans of committing to whatever our convictions are, so maybe that will be the case. But yeah, for now, I think great insights from you, and we'll obviously keep track of what happens in Wildcard 7. The next one is this is very good, very brief because I'm just going to walk people through what I have here. So this is what I've done is I've compiled all players for all match days, and I have their minutes, their real points, their real minutes EV, and then the difference between real minutes EV and real points. So I've sorted this by real minutes EV, and as you can see, no player has outscored Kane on EV. So effectively, him having the highest real points score in the match day matches up with him having the highest EV in any match day, which was against Dinamo Zagreb. So what this graph is showing us, and there's a histogram plotted here, which is showing. So there are bins of real minutes EV, the difference between the real minutes and real points. Sorry, and what this shows is that there's over 2,500 player instances out of a total of I think it's like 5,600, but yeah, 5654. So out of 5654 player instances, there's 2,500 instances of uh, the difference between EV and real points falling between minus 0.79 and sorry, 0.01 and 0.41, which uh, on face value is extremely encouraging. But obviously, it's because there's like 2,500 instances of players playing 0 minutes. And if they play 0 minutes, then the EV is going to be zero. So that is boosting the statistics. So if we eliminate all those instances and look at this, so we have over 600 instances of players between 0.17 and zero point 0.8. Again, unfortunately, I don't have any other data or EV model to compare this with, and I don't think comparing this to review is going to make a lot of sense because first of all, I think reviews, because it's a single league, it's so much easier to predict team strengths and predict EV. Also, because his model is much more sophisticated than mine is, so it would not gain any insights by doing that. I think the more insights I would gain is I encourage anyone if they have their own EV model to supply me with this data and we can compare or do some comparative study between multiple models. I think there's two models that I know of for UCL Fantasy, and perhaps I can reach out to them to see if they're willing to share their data with me. If that's the case, then we can probably have a better sense. But yeah, this is just to show uh, just a brief glimpse into the data that I've been gathering and what people should expect at the end of this season in terms of data that I would share with them. Just a side note, all the yellow cells are are part of the captaincy matrix. So it's great to see that a huge chunk are uh, towards the top across all six match days. And then there's obviously some instances where, because of day one, day two, day three, they are spread out throughout this. So, any thoughts? Sorry, I rambled on a little bit there, but your thoughts on this, and if you have any suggestions.
No, I think it's quite impressive, especially given how subjective this game can be sometimes, and like questions around ball recoveries and man of the match
Yeah.
points and everything. So I think this is, yeah, it's quite impressive. And considering the number of players to account for as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I appreciate you complimenting me. I wasn't fishing for that, but I appreciate that. So, we can probably, there's two things I wanted to talk about. One is man of the match. Like you said, extremely subjective. There's no way for us to actually model this in a perfect way. But one thing that I would encourage users to do is use their own conviction, right? And there is no way for me to, let's say, assign 3 points to Florian Wirtz from the get-go, because that is not how expected value works. Even though I know that if he gets one goal contribution, he's probably going to get man of the match. Unfortunately, that's not how this works. So the only way I can model man of the match is I still have to project certain things that will happen in a game and then try to weigh what is the probability of players getting man of the match and then assign that value to each player. So last season this was Jude Bellingham. This season it is Florian Wirtz, and MD5 is the perfect instance, right? Where if because I don't want people to, rather I want people to have some reference point when we are talking. So this is what the Armin's EV ended up, right? And because Wirtz got subbed at 76 because of game state, he actually ended up on 7.27 Armin's EV, as opposed to Lewandowski who was on 8.41 Armin's EV. So in this case, both Instinctive and I captain Wirtz over Lewandowski. Uh, and I think the primary reason, and okay, maybe this is a better, let me do this. Let me filter here because this will show the pre-game and post-game expectation. Yeah. So Lewandowski was 8.7, Wirtz was 8.4. And what this shows that the EV was, the difference was so slim that this was the perfect time where your conviction could come into play. Because, of course, I haven't assigned 3 points to Florian Wirtz here. But if you were to do that based on your experience, and if you think or if you predict that he's going to get man of the match, then that would make him the runaway candidate for captaincy. So, in cases of close EV calls, I think your user conviction and prediction of who would get man of the match would really come into play here. Your thoughts, Instinctive?
Yeah, I agree with you. When you were speaking, a different example came to my mind, but in Fantasy Formula One, you get points for Driver of the Day,
Hmm.
and Driver of the Day is fan voted.
Okay.
So that's even more subjective.
Yes.
So at one point, whatever Lando Norris did, he would get Driver of the Day. He crashed in one race and still got Driver of the Day. So accounting for EV in such cases is just, it has to be a case of conviction and personal
Hmm.
belief. Like I think at one point I was giving him nearly 80% share of Driver of the Day, which is because it's worth 10 points. So that's quite a big share
Hmm.
to manually account for, but
Hmm.
whatever he did, he would just get it. And I think doing that a little bit in your head is good. Like with players like Florian Wirtz and Griezmann, they just intuitively do enough to be preferred by the UEFA panel.
Hmm.
I think, especially some midfielders, the Rodri, for example. I think he would be Rodri and De Bruyne. I think they would be quite good on this basis compared to someone like Holland. Like even if De Bruyne gets 2 assists and Haaland scores a hat trick, I wouldn't be surprised to see De Bruyne get man of the match ahead of him.
We already have an example where Holland scored 2 goals and
Yeah,
Foden got a goal and an assist, I think, and Foden got man of the match. It's also because obviously this they look at multiple things, so they claim. But I think I've gotten a handle of how they think about things, but all of that has to happen after the match, which is after the fact. Because, for example, when people are talking about
yeah,
Salah getting man of the match, I told anyone who asked me straight away that's not going to happen. Just because they are looking for
mm,
some hipster approach where, okay, let's try to give this to a defender now because they kept a clean sheet in a 1-0, stuff like that. And
yeah.
I told them it's going to be either Robbo or it's going to be Allison. And it turned out to be Robertson or Van Dijk. I said three actually. I said Van Dijk as well. So becoming predictable, but unfortunately, it's of no use to us because that predictive ability is after the fact. It's just between the window of after the match ends and when they announce the man of the match. So it's fun in the sense that uh, it's entertaining, but there's very little we can do about that.
Yeah, and it can get frustrating, I suppose, but I mean, it's out of your control at that point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're spot on there. So anyway, we've reached the final segment. And okay, sorry, before we do this, uh, please, I want you to be candid about this. So you used my data model for this season, and I think for the last season as well. So where do you think there's room for improvement? And one thing which I'm going to speak upfront about is a solver, right? Because obviously you have the data, you have the EV, you just need a solver to sort of spit out some solutions for you based on that expected value. So I'll speak more to that, but before I do that, I wanted to get your opinion on where you think the content can improve.
actually, yeah, I think a solver would be quite useful
Yeah.
because there's only so many permutations that your mind can really handle. Maybe a filter for match days, for like day one and day two, if possible. That could be useful, I suppose.
Okay.
Especially when you're trying to see a split of how many players you have from each day.
Hmm.
Because ideally you would like more from day one, but then that might mean you're in trouble for the next match day and so on. So that could be, like, at a glance, quite helpful, I think.
Okay, that's actually a really helpful suggestion. I would
Uh, le-
definitely try to incorporate that for MD7.
Yeah, so like the drop downs you have to filter between match day ranges
Hmm.
if one for days were possible.
Yep, yep, that works.
I think that's about it, really.
Yeah, I think you're being too generous here. I'm pretty sure there's other stuff that probably we can improve, but I appreciate this is a great insight and a very helpful thing for me to understand as well because the more I understand how people utilize the data, the more I can refine it. Like for example, how I introduced adjustable minutes model this season, which I think was perhaps my best decision yet because that way you can
I
really
agree.
yeah
I was
you can give users control of the data rather than uh, keeping it to yourself.
Yeah, Duro's Fantasy, I was linearly adjusting your data, so I
Hmm.
was taking the 90-minute data and adjusting it 2 minutes, but that's probably not the most accurate way of doing
Hmm.
things. I was quite happy when I saw that there was an adjustable minutes model.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. So we move on to the last segment, which is um, talk about a little bit of what Instinctive does on his Substack page and Brighton predictions. So, Instinctive, you have the floor. Let us know in terms of what is coming up because I saw that there's going to be an article published at you said 2 p.m. I think, right? GMT.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
so it's the one on the bottom left of your screen.
yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
so I write articles on Brighton and try and predict their lineup every week. Lineup predictions are on Substack most weeks, but when it's a busy week for me, I just write a shorter thread on Twitter, and then I try and analyze like the tactics and try and gauge what's going on in the manager's head in longer form articles. because uh, I feel like if you read enough about a manager and listen to them speak enough, you start seeing patterns that are otherwise difficult to explain. Like you just gain a sense of understanding of how many minutes a player can get and in what scenario. And I think my aim with the articles I write is to lay down my thoughts in such a manner that the person reading them can make their own educated guess, because there's definitely a good chance I'm wrong. But if I put out my thoughts in a detailed enough manner, you can match it with your own intuition, and then that's just creating a good aggregate sort of sense of where my mind is at. And especially with Brighton, like I think the last 3 years, there's been an incredible amount of rotation. De Zerbi was not fun to
Yeah,
predict.
yeah.
Like he started rotating goalkeepers at random patterns. It started off in a two-match pattern, so Steele would get 2 matches, Verbruggen would get 2 matches, and then it just spiraled out of control. It's a little more settled this year, but Brighton's current manager, Huesler, just lies, sort of. Like he doesn't. It makes sense. If I was the manager, I would probably do the same, but he's very vague in his press conferences.
How close is
So if he gives
Kadioglu?
a vague injury update, huh, um, yeah, I have no idea. Turkish media said 2 months. 2 months is nearly here. We've heard nothing. I think when Milner originally got injured, it's been nearly 4 months. He said that Milner is day to day. So I'm not sure how many days he meant because it's been like 120 days. But yeah, I interesting. But yeah, at some point you start understanding the clarity an update gives. It's not easy to necessarily quantify, but you get a vague guesstimate.
Okay, so let me probe you a little bit more about this. So, for example, you had Joao Pedro's minutes at 55%. Not minutes, sorry, my bad. Let me rephrase. You put out a starting lineup based on whatever you have estimated and predicted. So, Emma jumped the wave on X.com, aggregates predictions from a lot of Brighton fans, such as yourself. Am I right in saying that you are also a Brighton fan, or are you just a fan of
Yes.
predicting? Okay, yeah, yeah. So, as a Brighton fan, you and many others predict starting lineups, and then that is aggregated and published. So there's that, and then you have your own write-up on each match day or each game week. So, for example, Joe Pedro being at 55%, how do you convert that into X-Mins and then input that into FPL review?
So that week I was very pessimistic of his minutes.
Hmm.
Maybe there wasn't as much of a reason to be in hindsight, but I think that is quite hindsight driven.
Yeah.
So what I did there was I gave him a 45% chance of playing 70 minutes,
Okay.
a 10% chance of playing 80 minutes, and a 45 no, and a 35% chance of playing 30 minutes, and a 10% chance of playing 20 minutes.
Okay.
Um, so I just added and multiplied them, and I think I reached around 51 minutes. And I gave myself a threshold of up to 60 minutes because I felt as if I was being pessimistic originally. And I think for that specific game week, I was low enough on his minutes to start Morgan Rogers ahead of him, which did work out, but it was quite a close decision. It could have gone another way on another day, but I was quite happy with my minutes read there. I think he got low 70s, and he was seeing limited minutes up until then. So considering the fact that it was a shorter turnaround and that he was getting limited minutes anyway, made sense for his start percentage to be lower than usual. Like I think this week it's back to high 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, players being out, like I don't know if Welbeck is back, but for example, Welbeck being unavailable definitely boosts that because you don't have any other alternative, right? You just have to play him. And also, the team is not doing particularly well right now, so there's added pressure of if you bench him and you perform badly, then it's going to further fuel dissenters. And there's enough of those dissenters when, for example, seeing Dunk's performances recently and people clamoring for Igor to be back. I saw your post about people asking for Igor to be back and then
Yeah.
criticizing him and then it's dunk and then it's all over again, the same thing. So I don't know what the solution is, but I don't envy what you do because, like you said, Brighton is notoriously difficult for expense predictions. But I think there's a lot of work there, and your Substack is there for people to go on and follow. And if there's anything, they can probably provide feedback. So I'm sorry, just one second. I don't know what happened here. Sorry, just one second. Oh, okay. It's still working. I don't know. YouTube threw a weird error my way, and yeah, I had to look at that. But anyway, we've come to the end of this episode. I appreciate that it's quite a substantial podcast episode, but this being the first episode, and I wanted to talk in depth with Instinctive about a couple of things, being that he uses the model regularly and he's played UCL Fantasy for a couple of seasons. I'm glad I got to do that with him. Any final thoughts, Instinctive?
No, just thank you for having me on. I enjoyed.
Yeah, my pleasure, absolutely. Please follow Instinctive
And
on x.com. Of course, I don't need to tell people to do that. He already has 11,000 of them. If anything, I think he should tell people to go and follow me. But anyway, um,
yeah.
do follow him and make sure to check out his Substack and stay tuned with the UCL Matchday podcast. I'll be hosting another episode next week with Mo Hesham, who is one of the most exciting FPL managers out there right now. And as he likes to remind people, he is extremely young as well. So stay tuned for that. Hope you have an excellent rest of your day and see you all very soon. Thank you very much. Bye.